The new year is here, and while the holiday season has come and gone, cold and flu season is still very much here. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, but man, it sucks being sick. Even a really minor cold can leave you feeling less energetic for a run, and workouts might be the last thing on your mind for more serious illness. It might sound insane to non-runners, but one of my first thoughts when I feel a cold coming on is how is this going to affect my training? And I don't think that I'm alone on that. You don't necessarily have to completely cut out running for a little bit of congestion, but running more than your body can handle is likely going to do more harm than good. So today, I'm joined by Coach Andy, and we're helping you figure out how to adjust your training if you start feeling under the weather. We do have a lot of training experience navigating sickness, but neither of us are medical professionals. So please don't take this as professional advice and consult your doctor if needed. There's a fine line between giving your body the rest it needs and fitting in just enough running to keep your fitness, if you're healthy enough for it. Of course, there's also nothing wrong with taking a break from running. Your body will thank you. We'll cover topics like what kind of symptoms are okay to run through and which aren't, how to know when you're ready to get back to normal training, and how to adjust your training plan while you're sick and after you recover. I'm wishing everyone listening good health in 2025, but just in case you happen to pick up a bug, you'll know what to do. So let's get into it. Welcome back to the show, Andy. As we're recording this, we are just in that really weird period between Christmas and New Year's. So how you doing this weird time of the year when I can't even figure out what day of the week it is?
Yeah, I have no idea. I've been traveling and we got back right before Christmas, so it just feels like I'm in this blur, just waiting for the new year. So almost there.
Well, where did you travel to? And thank you for right off of a vacation, making the time to fit in a podcast.
Yeah, so I was in back in Raleigh where we moved from for a week. We were finishing the move. We didn't quite get everything out of the house. And then we were in Florida celebrating Christmas with my sister who just had twins. So that was super exciting. Got to meet them. But of course, I got sick right before we were literally like the day before I started getting a cough that lingered and got worse by the time we got there. So I unfortunately couldn't be around the babies too often. But I think that perfectly leads into the conversation today, though. Being sick this time of year. So I'll let you go ahead and jump into things.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. And honestly, this was inspired by my own experiences too, because I recently got back from a trip for a race out of the country, and of course found myself sick for a lot of that trip, and thought this would actually be a good topic because unfortunately, being sick sucks, and it's kind of disruptive to your running.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think I've been seeing a lot of athletes that I coach who are also dealing with this time of year. I think there's a lot of stuff going around, and our immune systems have probably shifted and changed a little bit in the years since COVID. So it's a good topic to kind of go through and discuss.
Yeah. So right off the bat, I think anyone who's not a runner probably is thinking, why would you ever run when you're sick? And of course, there's definitely times when you're not going to run. So how do you decide if that's something you should even consider? Are there symptoms that maybe you don't want to run through and others that you would?
Yeah, so I mean, coming from somebody, we're not doctors like you mentioned, but there's certain things that I try to use as markers for myself. And so even this last week when I was in Florida, most of my symptoms were a cough, and I didn't really quite feel run down. I just kind of felt occasionally I had a headache, and I didn't feel like running in that circumstance. And so I sort of tried to use a little bit of, how are you feeling motivation wise too? And then also, how are these symptoms, and will running make that worse? How will any of these things, how are they going to impact how I feel? And so those are some of the considerations that I try to take into account. But on a larger scale, we don't want to run in through anything. There's like one of the good rules of thumb is, if it's above the head, so anything in your head, your congestion, that kind of stuff, not necessarily something that's going to be horrible to keep running through. Anything below the neck, so anything in your chest, if you have a fever, anything like that, we don't want to run through. We just have a higher likelihood of exacerbating things, making things worse, creating prolonged sickness, more likely to get the infections and different things like that. And so we want to just be really careful and really let your body guide you. That was kind of what I used last week. And I took Tuesday off in the middle of the week because I was kind of feeling more crummy that day. And then the next day, my energy levels were fine. I felt good, other than the cough. That was the only symptom I had. I was, feeling good. So I went ahead and went for a run and ran by feel. I avoided doing a workout. I actually shifted all of my training around so that I could push off doing any intense work because, especially if I took the day off the day before, so I don't know how my body's going to feel. So I pushed off the workout until later in the week, and just ran easy a few days just to see how my body responded. And nothing got worse. And I still felt fine. My heart rate, that was something I looked at, was what my resting heart rate was showing, and then also what my heart rate was looking like while running, because that can be a good indicator of the stress that your body is going through. And so those were some other factors I took into account when I was gauging whether or not I was healthy enough to continue to run. And then I did a workout later in the week and just did one that's more of a effort based, so fartlek workout, instead of doing a full blown distance based with specific paces. I really just went by feel and sort of progressed through the workout that way. And so I think that's a good way to sort of go through training when you're sick. But it's very nuanced. It's individual. There's context to it. So, we can talk about different types of illnesses and that kind of stuff as well. But from a general scope of things, you can use those rules of thumb that I mentioned in the beginning, and then allow yourself to go by feel.
Yeah, that's what my coaches used to say as well as a rule of thumb in terms of the below or above the neck in this case, but I guess essentially the same as the head. But I'd love to hear more about how you actually use heart rate, and especially when you're sick, because maybe you're better than I would be in this case, but I think if I were to try to use heart rate when I was sick, I'd just be staring at my watch the whole run, just begging for it to go down so I can keep running.
Yeah, that was like you can typically tell before you even run if your resting heart rate is elevated, then it's very likely that your body's working pretty hard to try to fight something off. And so that can be a good indicator that if it's like way higher than normal, that it's probably not smart for you to run because your body's currently under that type of stress. If it's just a little bit higher, then, you can go, but I would take it easy. And then during the run, and this was something I especially did during COVID because we were seeing a lot of athletes when they had COVID, their heart rates were running high. And so sometimes people would feel fine, totally fine, but their heart rate would be elevated. And that's just a clear sign that your body is under duress. And so we have to be mindful that even if you feel fine, if you're seeing like really high heart rate values when you're trying to run while sick, then you're probably not helping yourself too much. So when I did have COVID, I had very mild symptoms, but I did notice the day I went to go run, I took a few days off there. It was really important that with COVID and flu and stuff like that, that you really are more cautious. That's definitely not something we want to mess around with because we don't want to create long-term illness, long COVID, or prolong or create more damaging effects from the illness or the viral illness. But that was something that, I was very cautious, took days off, took maybe 2 or 3 days off. And then, I was feeling good, didn't have a fever. And I just decided to go for a run. And I noticed my heart rate being much more elevated than normal. It was like getting up into the 160s running really easy. So I did a run walk that day. And then the next day when I went out, I was also monitoring it and I noticed it came down. And so that was a good sign to me that I was managing my symptoms well, that I was listening to my body, that my heart rate was coming down, that it's, it's coming off of that high heart rate. It's coming off of that stress. So that was a good indicator for me. If it hadn't been able to be controllable on that day when I went for my run, and I kept that run real short. I tried not to do anything. I didn't do any intensity, really tried to be really mindful of how long I went and all that kind of stuff. But if I was feeling bad at the same time and I was seeing those heart rate values, that's when you stop, call it, give yourself some more rest and keep going from there.
Yeah, this intuitive approach got me thinking about comparisons to injury, because one of the things my physio or chiropractor always tell me is think about, is it getting better, worse as you run? Do you think that applies to sickness as well, or do you maybe have to be a little bit more cautious compared to an injury?
I think it can apply because you can see if you've stressed your body too hard by how your body responds to that exercise when you're sick. So if you're sick and you do a hard run and next thing you know, you're just feeling so much worse the next day, then your body probably it's under too much stress for you. It's essentially that when your body feels bad the next day after a hard session when you're sick, It's mostly because it's going to need extra recovery time. So most likely you didn't also get any benefit from that workout. It's kind of like running too hard in a workout. You're just stressing your body more than it can handle, so it needs to recover further. And so your body's responding in a way that's saying, "Hey, this is a lot for me to take on, and I need more time to recover, and your immune system needs more support." And so we don't want to create this system where we're not supporting our immune system constantly and it's continually being drained and drained. It just creates this cycle where you can be more susceptible to picking up new illnesses. And then you just get in this cycle of just being sick for a long period of time, catching new things and all of that. So I'm always I think I caution on the side of support your immune system first. So I'd rather you be a little bit more cautious with your rest and recovery and taking it easy than just to force through it, because I just think that's not going to, like I said, even if we can do workouts and be fine or be okay, like, are we actually getting any benefit from those workouts, or are we just sort of prolonging something or just adding more stress that your body's taking longer to recover from? So yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely made that mistake of training too hard through sickness, and sometimes you just feel like you've been hit by a train the next day. Your body just does not recover properly.
Yeah, and I had that experience too. I was like, I'm feeling better. I'm gonna go try to do this workout, and I tried to do it, and it was awful. Like, it just didn't it didn't go well at all. And I ended up like having to shut it down like halfway through. But I also had done like an out and back, so it was definitely the dumbest decision. I had to like still find a way back to my car, despite that. And I tried that workout again, a couple weeks later, and I was way faster and just felt tons of loads better. So, you're probably better off just sort of delaying things. And that's what I did last week. So I pushed some of the workouts I had last week to this week, and maybe I would have been fine, but it's not worth that. I don't have anything pressing that I have to run. And I think every workout works together. So if you have to skip a workout or let one go or push training a little bit, you'll be fine at the end of the day. All of it's going to come together to work together. So
Yeah, now's a good time to call myself out, because I was feeling a little bit sick even before my race and ran the marathon, and it was probably worth it for the marathon by the time you travel to Europe, but for any other regular workout or run, the amount it probably delayed my recovery is definitely not worth it.
yeah, the races are a different story. You kind of have to, you do whatever you can. You take all the the medicine that you can and do all the recovery stuff. You do everything you can going into a race, and you got to kind of take your best shot and make the smart call. But very similar to when I ran the Olympic trials in 2016, I had a chest cold, mostly from overtraining, which we can also talk about how that affects your immune system and how you're more susceptible to illness in the taper. If you're in that state, you can still be more susceptible to illness in the taper even if you're not overtrained. But I was overtrained for sure, and so when I tapered, I got sick maybe the week before, and it being a chest cold and it being warm out there, the chances of that race going well were pretty low for me. But I tried anyway, because you're not gonna just give up that opportunity, but you kind of have to be ready and able to decide if that race is just not worth pushing through. In your case, you probably were like, I didn't feel as good, but I could continue to race. And in my case, I actually ended up with heat exhaustion, which was probably exacerbated by being sick, since I was having like a lot of the chest congestion and coughing and a little bit of difficulty with breathing even before the race. So, I ended up dropping about halfway through. And so that was the right call for me that day. Even when race day, you kind of have to be able to hold yourself accountable and know exactly kind of like what's the right move here, and race smart too, so that you can come out of it, have better, you have more races to come. So, use that also as a marker.
Yeah, it sounds like you've developed a really intuitive sense of when your body is able to keep pushing and when you really need to pull the plug, even at a race as
Yeah.
important as the U.S. Olympic trials.
Yeah, it was hard. That was one of those things that I mean, I had been walking already anyway. So, it was kind of one of those things. It's like, it's not worth it to keep going. But this has taken me, it's not like this has been like I know exactly how to manage this. It's been years of me not doing that to get to this point where I'm just a lot more flexible with myself with training. And that's kind of what I think a lot of my athletes have taught me that probably seeing how they've managed and negotiated through injuries and how I would tell them to do it. It's kind of helped me reflect on like, what are you doing? Why are you running? If you feel so bad. But yeah, this last week I was still coughing and having that while running, but mostly after because it kind of gets all that phlegm going. But I was feeling good in all of my runs, so I was letting that be the most important factor. And if I had a headache or didn't feel good before, I was kind of negotiating with myself. So
I think runners can be so stubborn and wanting to push through, so it's a good message that looking back on pulling the plug on a race like the Olympic trials, you have zero regrets and still label it now as the right call.
yeah, and it helped me for later that year. I ran my first marathon that went well, and so not putting myself in this like deep hole, kind of continuing through that was what I needed. So yeah.
Yeah. I want to take a little mini detour because you talked a little bit about getting sick a lot while you're running. And I've heard this before, that your immune system is compromised when you're training a lot. And it makes sense. Your body's focused on so many things when you're at a high training load. But one thing that I notice is the time when I tend to get sick the most is during the taper or right before the race, which to me personally is surprising because I would think it's when you're doing the most training. But maybe you have a sense why this is.
Yeah, and I don't know specifically why, but I've even read stuff that talks about how you're more susceptible to illness in the taper. And maybe it has something to do with just like when you're in the depths of training, your body's really in a protective mode. It's trying to keep you healthy. It's trying to keep you from, it wants you to be able to continue to do that. When you strip some of that away, your body is going to respond in a way that's like, oh, okay, we don't have to have our defenses up quite as much because we're not carrying that same load. We're not, similar to the way that those aches and pains you can get in the taper. I think very similar to how you'll feel those a little bit more when you're tapering than maybe you felt in training because your body's able to sort of disguise that pain with, the pain of training hard. And so I think that's probably part of why we start to see that happening more in the taper is that we're stripping some of that away. We're more susceptible. The other thing is that if you race, especially this time of year, the cold can have an impact. The cold doesn't make you sick. Running in the cold's not going to be the reason that you get sick, but it lowers your immune response. So you're more susceptible to getting sick when you're in the cold a lot. But also, colds and all that kind of stuff. You're closer to people. We have a lot more family gatherings and times where we're together with people indoors. So that's how we see those things spreading quicker during these times of year. So it could be that you did everything perfectly correct and you took care of yourself and you tapered right and you didn't taper too much and you still get sick, and it could just be that right timing for picking up something. You just came into contact with the right person at the right time, or I guess the wrong person at the wrong time to get sick, and it's just more common this time of year, and that can be sort of a part of it. But yeah, you're definitely going to be a little bit more susceptible to picking some stuff up, and I think the taper can be a part of that, and like how we manipulate that to. If you do over taper, you're more likely your defenses drop way more. And so we sort of have to manage that with the training a little bit. And that's something I've been sort of thinking a lot about with some of the athletes I coach. And it's hard to know, right? Like was it the taper? Was it just, the holidays and being in contact with people more and how did that impact and all that stuff? So.
But before this comment, I should really reiterate that I'm not a medical professional, but this almost sounds like a little bit of the hair of the dog. It's like, if you keep drinking, you're not going to feel the effects, or just if you keep training hard, then you never get to that taper phase where you get sick.
Yeah, right. And it would be great if you could just continue that, but it won't work in your favor quite so much. But it's really about managing how you kind of cut down and do all those things. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe let's get into some of that management piece because I think it's almost simpler if you're like really sick. Like I think if you're sick with the flu or COVID, just stay home, rest. That's probably the best advice. But if you do have just a little bit of that, that congestion, runny nose, and you're probably okay to run, as it sounds was probably your case, how do you figure out how to balance your training load so that you can still train but help your body to recover?
Yeah. So I think that for the most part, like what the data says is that you're not gonna necessarily performance isn't impacted by a cold. A cold's not gonna derail you or make you slower or do any of that stuff. But sometimes the effects and how we feel when we have a cold does impact our performance because you just don't feel good, and we sort of need some of those positive influences in when we start a workout to maintain our paces and run well. So there's those factors that can impact. So from what I did was I moved things around last week so that I could see how I felt with an easy run before pushing on a workout. So that's a good way to adjust. And on the worst day of the cold, when it first starts and you're feeling crummy, that's a good day to go ahead and take a rest day, or shift just like a short, easy run to that day. See how your body responds. See how you feel. If you feel worse, then rest the next day, and then try another easy run before you push on any type of workout after sickness. I always want to have a test run of just an easy run before attempting that. So you can always be flexible with your workouts. You might have to drop a workout, and that's going to be totally fine as well. I think it's better that you have less intensity during that week when you're sick so that it doesn't develop into something worse. You're not like your performance may not be worse, but if you do go train hard and your body's response to that is that it's more stressed and then we get an infection, then that's going to impact our training and that's going to make us lose a few days. So I'm always thinking, okay, how would this fare next week and the week after? If I run today, will that mean that I'm going to be worse off next week or in the next few days? Or is running today going to be safe for me to still be able to think in the future of, okay, how does this fare with the races I have coming up? Like, I don't want this to linger. I want this to go away as fast as possible. So what does that mean for how I plan the training that I'm going to do in the next few days? And so that's going to be something where you really have to be able to listen to your body and be very, very true to yourself and honest with, how do you feel, and how will this affect me going forward? And a missed run, sometimes a missed run is the best solution for feeling better. And training is not beneficial unless it's we're rested and recovered and feeling good. So if that means take that extra rest day, then by all means that's going to be the way that you get faster. That extra run probably won't make you better. So it's kind of like recognizing that each run that you do doesn't really have that big of an impact on you as on your training as a whole. So if that means we miss a few runs and we don't have the perfect training and volume's a little bit different one week to the next, then that's okay. That's part of the ups and downs of the training that you're doing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I can probably link it in the show notes, but I do know we have an article out about how quickly you lose fitness, and really within the first week or two it's almost negligible. So if the average minor sickness is 3 to 5 days, even if you took that whole time off, I'd imagine you're probably not losing that much compared to if you resume normal training.
Exactly. And I had a client who missed a bunch of training. She was supposed to race, this was Richmond last year, and she missed a lot of training going into race week. So she was in the taper, and pretty congested and all of that. And we decided to just switch to the 8K because we were like, I don't know if it makes sense to run a marathon. She was still a little congested. We talked on race week, and but we decided to switch to the 8K. She ran a PR in her 8K. So she maintained fitness pretty well through that, despite she felt better by race day from having rested. And yeah, so she was able to pull out a really strong race. She did have to change distances because that was going to be more suitable from the training perspective and where she was with the missed training. But, it still worked in our favor to be able to still go out there and try something. And yeah, I think it's important to recognize that we really don't lose that much, and we can build it back quicker than we expect. That was something that I now have two experiences, having taken 3 months off from training in the more recent future. So one was I wasn't allowed to do any cross training at all, because I had to keep my heart rate down, and I was dealing with a more of an autoimmune thing. And this time it was from surgery, where I was sort of doing some cross training, but several of those months were just sort of like spinning my legs on the bike. But the difference between coming back this time and that time was just wild. Like I was jumped right back into training following the surgery, just from this minimal amount of cross training. So if you feel okay, but the thought of a run feels a little bit too demanding, you could always pop on the bike and just do a light spin just for time. That way you can also stay inside, and not be exposed to any elements that are going to lower your immune system further if it's cold out. And that can be a good way to still maintain that fitness through that period of time. And just a little bit takes you a long way, which is what I experienced just in this last, half of a year, where I was recovering from my hip surgery. And, my race, I did a race beginning of December, which was like 7 months after I had my surgery, and ran faster than I did the last time I raced this race. So that goes to show, do what you can, but you're really not losing fitness that quickly.
So I've seen that you're back to a little running. I don't think I noticed the race. Do you maybe want to call out what that race was and the time?
Yeah, it's actually a really great race in North Carolina at Rocky Mount. It's a small town, about 45 to 50 minutes away from Raleigh, where I used to live. And it's awesome. Actually, it raises money for MS. The race director's wife has MS, so they send all the proceeds to MS, and she's out there. The whole family's out there. They put on the event themselves, and it's actually a brewery throwdown, so they score it cross-country style, and all the breweries have teams, and they're competing against each other. And so I signed up, and they just put me on a random team, but the race director wanted it to be competitive, so he put me on a team that had a chance of beating this team that has won the last several years. And so the women's team at Bond Brothers, we actually won this year, which was pretty cool. But it was a 4-mile race, and it was my second one that I was doing. And I ran, I don't know the time, I ran about 5:42 pace or 5:43 pace. But the last time I ran it, I think it was like 5:49 or something like that. So I was pretty excited and I had to kick to win at the end. So I outkicked a girl at the finish line. So it was a pretty exciting finish there. But I was trying to race by feel, started a little quick, and then tried to just keep things even and not really pay too much attention to my time and just have fun with it. And that's kind of what I ended up doing. And it worked well. But yeah, that week I also had to be flexible with my training, because we drove to Raleigh and got in late, and I just had to skip a run before that race. And I kind of was like, you know what, this is better for me, because I think I would have just been more stressed and more tired if I had tried to squeeze that run in. So, goes to show that it can be beneficial.
Yeah, pretty solid for a December race. Is that the equivalent of probably a sub 18 5K? Is that right?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know yet. I was like, wow. I was surprised. I was kind of guessing what I thought I could do, and I was faster than that. So I was pretty excited to sort of have that be my second race experience as we continue to build things up here.
Not bad coming off of illness and surgery.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been fun. It's been enjoying sort of, getting back in the swing and just having fun doing races that are enjoyable. So that can be a good way to sort of also navigate this time frame where we could be more likely to get sick, or have some different things popping up with schedule and travel and stuff like that. Is just throw some races in there that maybe you're not putting a huge stock on, but you can just sort of see how you can do with low expectations, and sometimes you can surprise yourself, and I think that can be a really way to build some confidence as we head into the new year.
Andy, you're spoiling ahead a little bit, because I'm actually working right now on putting together an episode about how you can work racing into your training better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry to jump ahead of that, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing now. So.
Perfect preview. One of the things you mentioned was on the cross training piece, and about how maybe it's a good option to hop on the bicycle for an easy spin if you're sick. But I think one of the key caveats there is easy, because again, coming back to the stubborn runner, I think the tendency might be to go, well, I'm not running, so I'm just going to go hammer the bike or the elliptical or whatever it is. So let's say you are a little bit under the weather and you're switching to the cross trainer, how do you still make sure that you're maintaining that right effort level?
Yeah, I that's honestly one of the hardest things is especially when you're on a stationary bike. Like I hate cross training. It's just so boring and sometimes the only way for me to really stick to it is to get competitive with it, which is not. I mean, that happened yesterday. I shouldn't have. I ran on the treadmill and did a group run, and then I was like, oh, now my legs are sore. Anyway, the like what I was doing, especially coming back from surgery, was finding like this depends on what kind of bike you have, but we had a Peloton, and I would just do the routes around the areas. Like you can go just ride a route that's in a random spot. So there wasn't really some competition to it, and I was just sort of going around a city, which was kind of fun and distracting. So that helped me to just kind of keep the effort easy. It was just kind of like enjoying the where I was in the world based on the route that I chose. So that can be a way to keep it easy, but also just sort of like turn on, if you don't have that, turn on a show you like, and just watch the show and just pedal comfortably as you watch that show, and don't feel like you have to make it anything insane. And then the other thing that I often do is, instead of doing like what's the equivalent of running 5 miles on the bike, because that would really be like doing a pretty long run, pretty long bike ride. Instead, I just go for the same amount of time that I would spend running. So if I was doing a 30, if I was planning to run for 35 minutes, then I'll hop on the bike for 35 minutes. So spending the same amount of time doing that activity is kind of how I will translate that to the bike. And that's partially because I'm like, it's not my favorite thing to do. So, I don't want to have to be on it for more time than I have to. And that also just kind of keeps the time association with the training that you're doing a little bit more manageable. So you don't feel like you're just like having to spend so much more time cross training. Cause I think that kind of eats away your willpower, and your willpower is part of what keeps you going when training, when we have these interruptions. And so I'd rather kind of keep some balance there, so that when I get back to running, I'm excited and motivated to keep going.
Yeah, and I think that's another piece of sickness too, is just personally, like when I feel crappy physically, the last thing I want to do is like have to push myself into a workout I don't want to do. So
Yeah.
my preference is always, when sick, if I don't feel like going for running, even if maybe I could be up to it, to just go ahead and skip it and take the mental break.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely like the first thing that I would like, advise towards is like just rest. You don't really have to replace that fitness with anything. And like we said, a few days off. I mean, a lot of the science and the data that we've looked at, I mean, it shows that you have to take at least like somewhere like 10 to 14 days off to see a negligible decrease in VO2 max. It's like 6 to 7% or something like that, which can be made up in a couple of weeks. So that break time is not necessarily something that's going to be like kill your training, especially if you have a really good foundation behind you. And actually, that's one of the reasons why a lot of the training that you're doing, we design it to have the build up phase be there, so that we build up a base of fitness, so that if we have these periods where we have to take days off, or we have to we're sick or something and we have to miss some training, that actually helps us to maintain better than if you just jumped back into training. I think I've seen this with athletes who are pro level, who maybe the racing season is coming up, so they have a really short and condensed training cycle, and their fitness, they can't maintain it for as long because they don't have that base behind them, but they also don't have as much room for interruptions because they lose a little bit more, a little bit quicker. So that's one of those things to keep in mind, is that build that base so that we have the room for these little periods to pop up, and we can take those and be fine. So, but yeah, that just remind yourself too, that if you have that base, that even more so, you're going to be just fine if we have to rest a few days to recover from sickness.
Yeah, I always like to build in sort of a week or two more in a training block than I think I really need to get up to fitness, because there's always going to be those times where you possibly need a break. I don't know about you, but have you ever had a training block that kind of went perfectly and where you didn't need any workouts missed or any time off?
I don't think so. It's funny because I will think back on work, like races that went really well, and I ran my PRs and stuff, and I'm like, oh, it's perfect. But like when I've looked back at training logs, I'm like, oh, actually, I felt crappy there and crappy there. So it's never really quite perfect. I did in the past have a lot harder time letting go of and not doing things. I used to just like be really a little bit too focused on being perfect with it, that I don't think I made the smart decisions, which is probably why going into the trials I was overtrained was more because I was worried about not doing all the things and not checking all those boxes, that I ended up overdoing it when I could have just been like a little undercooked and probably a lot better off. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I love logs and taking notes when you're running. And for any runners who don't do this already, I would strongly advise to keep notes when things don't go your way as well, because I find them so much more beneficial. And in my most recent training block, I think when I missed a little bit of time for training with injury, it was so helpful to be able to look at other training blocks where I also missed time and go, actually, you can still run pretty well, even if you're not hitting every workout or running every workout.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's good to be able to have that comparison to look back on, and that's the same thing with this last 3 months. Is like, oh, I came back a lot faster than I did in that last 3 month period, and that goes to show just the difference in how those two time periods had to be structured. And I think it's given me that appreciation that there's more flexibility in training than it sometimes feels like.
Yeah, one of the things you said about your most recent illness is eventually you sort of gradually transition into workouts with a fartlek, I guess is almost like an introductory workout. Where does that kind of fit into the whole illness piece? Because I think, there's the easy runs and dial it back, but at some point you're probably going to go back to training. So how do you draw that distinction between, we've sort of covered when you need to take time completely off versus easy running, but then that other step of keeping it easy versus when you're actually ready to maybe add a little bit of intensity.
Yeah, we have a really good blog post, I think, that Jeff wrote on this topic specifically, because he sort of outlines actually how to ease back into training given a bunch of different circumstances, whether it be a few days or, in my circumstance, it was, I started getting sick. Probably I started just having a cough and I didn't really feel that bad Monday of last week. And so I ran that morning and then I flew to Florida and I was going to double and I just didn't have time. So I was like, I'll do it tomorrow. And then I woke up the next day and I just felt crummy. Like I just was like, I had a little bit of like a sinus headache and all that. And there was a lot going on. And I just was like, just did not want to run. I just did not feel good enough. So I rested that day, and I decided I would shift my rest day that I had planned. I actually think I switched weeks completely. So I switched my down week that I had planned for this week to last week. And so then I was like, well, let me just see if I can still get the mileage that I want in this week and see how it goes. And so with that rest day, I felt better the next day. So I just did an easy run. And sort of like was like, we'll just take it, no worry about pace, just run by feel. And I kind of had a set distance I was planning on doing, but I would have cut it short if it was not feeling good. And then the next day I was, still feeling fine. So I did a run and threw in some strides. So strides can be a good way to sort of have a little bit more intensity without being a workout. So you can see how your breathing is and all that on a faster paced workout. So that was my next step. And then I did a workout. So I kind of shifted my workout that I had planned to do that Tuesday when I had rested. I shifted to Friday. I think, Wednesday. Yeah, Friday. And so that gave me enough time to assess and still get that workout in without, losing too much muscular coordination and stuff like that. But, if we've missed a week or so, like that might change how we get back into training because, your muscles need to be and your ligaments and all those things need like a slight lead in period just to kind of remind them like, okay, this is what we want to do. We don't want to do anything too quick and too intense that's going to, put us susceptible to injury. So that's where we kind of have to play with timing. And maybe we use the rest of that week to just run easy and build some mileage back up before we attempt to work out. So maybe we're looking at more like 4 or 5 Ds or whatever that needs to be. And we throw some strides in at some point. But yeah, we'll have to link that blog article that really talks really specifically on each circumstance and the timeline for how long you've taken off. 'Cause I think that can be a really good guide to help you decide what makes the most sense. And then it's just really, again, so much of just relying on your effort and how your body feels, and really really being honest with it.
Yeah, we'll definitely link that in the show notes. But just to summarize a little bit of how do you figure out what that transition looks like once you're feeling better? Because I think for a lot of runners, they may think in terms of week number, how far out from races, because I think a lot of training plans, they sort of have week one, week two, all the way up to 16 or 18 or however long it is.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of time after you're sick, it doesn't necessarily make sense to just pick up where you left off or go to the next week. So how do you figure out how to get back into training and then ultimately what that lead up to the race looks like?
Yeah, so if you're pretty deep into the training and you've put together a lot of really solid weeks of training, and maybe you're like a few weeks out from the race, at that point you're probably just like, let's just focus on the taper. Don't go back and make up workouts. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of runners make, especially later in a training cycle, is they try to cram in and make up things that they missed. But for the most part, like especially if you're getting close to race day, you're better off being undertrained than overtrained, and sometimes you can get overtrained very quickly if you try to just go cram everything back in that you missed, especially if you've missed a week or so. So better off to just continue as planned. The workouts are probably starting to get a little bit lighter because you are tapering. If you're sort of right in the middle, you can probably sort of, skip those workouts again that you missed. And maybe you might need to, depending on if the workouts often build on themselves. So if the workouts you have coming up are maybe a build and you missed something in there, then that's a good time to replace those workouts that you missed with the workouts that you have coming up if they were a build on a previous week. And so that would be one of the only circumstances where we would make up things, but it's really replacing. We're not going to do those and then add in more workouts so that we're cramming things in again. It's just you kind of want to ease them back in, and also not get too heavy. So you may not do some of those bigger workouts that you maybe had closer to race day because you kind of got sick in the middle, but that's okay. Like, you're building up as much as you can, and you can always outrace your training. That's one of those things that even my recent race, feel like I probably outraced my training a little bit, because the first mile was faster than I've run in training in anything longer than like a minute. I maybe did a minute at that pace. So we can always outrace our training. We just have to give ourselves the opportunity to do so. And so that may mean that a little less is a little bit more beneficial to us. If we're early in a training cycle, then you probably want to just start over. So just get back, go focus more on your back on your build up phase, so that we're not sacrificing that base just so we can be prepared for our upcoming race. You may just have a shorter build, and that's okay. Like we said, again, that could also mean that we're more prepared going into race day. So just start from scratch, and then build some things back up, and we just may have to cut a few of those different workouts out. We may be better off just getting more of the mileage under us and having gut base before we go into that race, and that might be more beneficial than a lot of intensity anyway.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is almost if you're right in the middle of a training block. It's almost easier, like at the beginning, you can sort of just ease back into it, or if you're at the end, you're almost right at the taper where you're going to rest anyways. But say you're right in the middle, sort of that maybe 5 to 8 weeks out from race day, what does that maybe look like once you start to feel close to 100%?
Yeah, and this is going to be a little bit more too, again, on how long did you take off, and what does that look like. And if it's just a few days, then you could probably just ease back in right on schedule. But if it's been a week or so, we probably want to do an easy down week that week. We could always shift things around to kind of ensure that if you had a recovery week coming up, maybe that becomes your recovery week, and we adjust how we get back into the next weeks. And that could be something that you can try. This is one of those circumstances, I think, that it really helps to have a coach, because they know exactly how they've planned the training, and they're going to be able to help to make sure that the stepping stones that we're trying to take as we get closer to race day are met. So that way they can really help you to adjust and figure out like what workouts are necessary. How can we build up the fitness so we can get those workouts in, and feel ready for them, and then be ready for race day. And so it's really hard to give like a concrete, like, this is what you do type of answer. But, I think that it starts with We always want to have a little bit of an easing in period, and that's going to depend on how long you took off. So a couple of days, you maybe only need a couple of days to ease back in. If it was 4 or 5 days, then we probably want to give ourselves about 4 or 5 days to sort of work back into things and do a lighter workout before we do a heavy workout. If it's, a week or more, then we might sort of have to take about a week to really get ourselves back in the groove and feel ready for a workout again. And we may sort of have to change those workouts for a few weeks to ensure that we're prepared to build those up effectively and not have it be too much too soon.
Yeah, I like that idea of just kind of using it as that rest week you're already going to take, even if maybe it was a little different timing than you would have otherwise planned.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Curious, what are your thoughts on sort of lingering symptoms after you've recovered? So, an example for myself is I think after I recovered from the sickness, I definitely had a bit of a sore throat and some congestion for a while after. And I do know for a lot of people who had COVID, they had a lingering cough for quite a while. My brother, after recovering, it lasted almost a month afterwards. You're probably feeling healthy at that point, but maybe still having symptoms. Do you need to adjust your training at all for that? Or how does that maybe play into how your body responds to a stimulus like running?
Yeah, I think, well, so that's actually similar to what I was experiencing is that, I didn't see any correlation with running making it worse. I mean, I was coughing more after I ran because you get a little bit more histamine buildup in your system, and you're producing a little bit more. And if it's cold, obviously your nose runs more, so that aids in the congestion. But I wasn't noticing myself feeling worse as I was going along, but the cough was starting to affect my sleep more than anything, and so that was going to start impacting my training if I can't sleep at night. And so something that I actually had to I went to the doctor. I went to the Minute Clinic because I was like, I can't, sick of this. I got to get rid of this. So if it's something that's impacting your sleep, anything like that, that's preventing, but you feel fine otherwise, I would go ahead and see if you can get some extra support. If there's anything they can give you that'll help to knock out any of those last few symptoms. I end up getting an antibiotic and another different type of cough suppressant to help. I've been doing a lot better. I slept through the night the last few days and didn't have any issues with that. And so that's something you can definitely look into if these lingering symptoms are affecting you in a way that is going to start impacting your training. If you're just congested during the day and it's not necessarily, you feel fine, it's not getting worse from your training, and it's not impacting how you sleep, then it's generally probably okay to keep training. But if it's going on for, like weeks and weeks and weeks, and you're like, this is just not getting any better, then again, like that's again another situation where you can, go see a doctor, see if there's something else going on that, because that could exacerbate. Even if it's pretty mild for a period of time, it could get worse, or there could be more to what's causing that we need to address. And so, I think for the most part, as long as it's not, we're not seeing an increase in symptoms from the exercise or anything like that, then I think generally, you can probably continue. That's kind of how I would go about it. But if it's similar to my circumstance, I would talk to a doctor.
Yeah, I think if it's impacting those other parts of your day, like eating and sleeping and stuff like that, you probably have other health-related items to be concerned with, not just running that might warrant speaking to a doctor.
Yeah, and I was like, I can't handle this anymore. Like, I'm just so tired of not being able to sleep properly, but feeling totally fine during the day. And I knew that if I let that lack of sleep build up, then I would probably have more issues. I'd probably get sick again. I'd probably create this cycle of, not of being sick, and then my body would really start to feel it and it would impact my training. So, that was where I kind of was like, yeah, let's go ahead and check with somebody so I can knock this out.
Yeah, the lack of sleep is very relatable. I felt that a lot after my recent marathon because I was just so congested. It was hard. I was sleeping on my back, which I normally don't do, just to get a little more elevation. But then I had black toes, so it made the covers uncomfortable. So it was just a mess trying to get sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you probably had to extend that recovery window a little bit there.
It was definitely extended. The one nice thing about post-marathon is that I wasn't so concerned with getting back to running. But yeah, being sick is never fun.
Yeah. Yeah. The post marathon, if it's like, that's why I always say it's like actually post race anything. It's like the perfect time to get sick. Not that there's any perfect time to get sick, but if you're going to be sick in the recovery window, like, that works because you have nothing but time to just relax and just let it run its course and not be stressed to get back to it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I will say maybe a little bit less so on like a traveling race when you're going somewhere.
Yeah.
Like if if you're going, in this case for me, it was over in Spain, but also if you're going to like Boston or Chicago, you probably want to explore a little. But in general, yeah,
Yeah.
training wise, it's the best time after a race.
Yeah. 100%.
So we've covered like most of this episode about how to respond if you get sick, whether you can run, how to adapt it a little bit. But the ideal is just to not get sick. So aside from your sort of more typical health related items, eat well, sleep well, is there anything runners can do to try to help themselves to not get sick during their training?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we don't get as much of this time of year, which has an impact on our immune system, is vitamin D. So, we don't have the sunlight, we have shorter days. So, and it's colder. So, a lot of times we're spending a lot of time indoors. And so that can be a reason that we, fall short of getting the amount of vitamin D that we need, which helps protect our immune system. So, taking some vitamin C and vitamin D and stuff like that this time of year can be really valuable for helping us to protect our immune system. If you're running in the cold, we talked about how the cold can impact your immune response and can make it so that you're more susceptible. But wearing the right clothes, making sure you keep warm and all that stuff can also help us prevent some of those factors. So that can be something, washing your hands this time of year often, covering your mouth, not putting your hands in your mouth, stuff like that, can help us as well. I think the hardest thing is though is if you have kids, because they're always picking things up and always getting sick, and then that gets passed around the house, and they have a hard time not sticking their hands in their mouth all the time. I feel like, but so that can be, I think, a challenge. But if you're taking that immune support, trying things like vitamin, what is the stuff that they have out there that you can take the packets of emergency? There's things like that out there that can be helpful for preventative. Zinc can be really valuable for helping us prevent colds. So if you're worried about it and you have a race coming up, that can also be something that you supplement with a little bit more as you prepare for a race, is taking a lot of that extra immune support type vitamins, and that can be super valuable as well. So those are probably the tips that I would give for the most part.
And is it just specific nutrients or do multivitamins help as well? And the reason I ask is because I have this recollection when the COVID outbreak started that everyone was taking like Flintstones gummies or different multivitamins thinking that it would protect them.
I mean, I think that they probably have some amount of all those different vitamins, but it's probably, the potency is probably a lot lower. So whether or not you're meeting the needs that you would want to kind of really create that safeguards around your immune system, I don't know. I don't know how much is in each one of those, and I'm sure there's some multivitamins out there that are specifically designed for immune system support. So if that's, I would look for those over just kind of your generic, because your generic's just going to be like, let me make sure that we're daily getting all of these different vitamins in a probably smaller dose or smaller quantity. And the other thing I think that with some multivitamins is, are there some interactions between different vitamins that are going to make some less, less, absorbable by the body. And that's something you'll want to be mindful of with a multivitamin, is knowing which ones will interact with other ones, and to help you pick which one is the best one for you. But yeah, I think, knowing what exactly you need for an immune support will help you to kind of target those specific vitamins like vitamin D and zinc and vitamin C and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's hard to know exactly what you're deficient in, but again, I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on this, but I do know the one nutrient that my doctor told me the majority of people do need, especially in the winter, is vitamin D.
Yep, a lot. There's not a lot of foods that we can actually also get it from. They're not foods that people typically eat regularly. I think it's like fish and like walnuts, and I don't remember exactly, but yeah, we don't have it as many food sources. So this is the perfect time of year to load up on it a little bit more.
Yeah. So I do hope that everyone listening is staying in good health and has a good training block. But if anyone's listening to this right now, kind of curled in bed, feeling maybe a little bit under the weather, what's your best advice for how to bounce back, I guess?
Yeah, my best advice is to first and foremost let your body rest. If you're not feeling good and you really need that rest, it's better to take it than to force yourself through it. I am super pro. Let's give your immune system every chance at success. So if that means a little bit more rest, then go for it. If you're feeling fine but you're a little sick, it's okay to kind of step out and see how your body's feeling when you move it. And sometimes a run when you just have a little cold can help us to clear some of that out. You have to embrace the snot rocket a little bit, but it can be a good tool to help us clear some of that out. But just keep in mind that no matter what you have to do to get better and feel better, that rest and recovery and all of these things are going to help you in the long run. And don't be fearful of having to adjust or change your schedule. You're going to be fine. You're probably going to be better off for it if you allow yourself to be flexible.
100%. A little PSA to make sure you look around you before letting go any snot rockets.
Yes. Make sure there's no one behind you, especially if you're racing.
Yeah, good courtesy on the run.
Yep.
So just as we wrap up, any personal plans running or otherwise for the rest of the holiday season?
Nothing the rest of the holiday season. I'm looking at some races. There's the Chattanooga Marathon is coming up, so I've been kind of looking at wanting to do some more local races around here just to kind of try some different things out. So I might do one of the races there, and then maybe a race back in Raleigh that I've done a couple times. That's just a fun half marathon there, and then kind of seeing how my body continues to feel, and hopefully a marathon in the fall. But kind of just taking it day by day with the hip and making sure we're still headed in the right direction.
Yeah, when's the Chattanooga Marathon?
March, let's see, March 2nd I think is the date. So I might do like the 5K there because it looked flat and fast. I just thought it might be fun. So.
Yeah, and that's from my recollection of that area. That's pretty good running weather in the morning in March.
Yeah, it should be on the cooler side, but anytime you're in the South, you never know. Like it could be 70 tomorrow and then go back to 50 or 30. So, but it should be pretty good weather. And the marathon and the half, I believe, are pretty hilly. It's pretty hilly around here, as I've learned. I did an 11-mile run that had 1,100 feet of elevation gain in it 2 days ago. But yeah, it'll be fun to try to build some strength out here and then race off of it and see how it goes.
Yeah, any chance of a 5K PR?
Maybe. I mean, who knows? My road 5K PR isn't as good, so I don't know that I could run a 5K PR like my track PR. But who knows? Let's see. I think my road 5K is just under 17, so we'll see. Maybe.
Okay, yeah, so just a little bit faster pace than what you ran for 4 miles.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that. I'll talk about it later. See if it happens.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll catch up on it on either the next podcast or whatever the first one is after the race. But that's awesome. Yeah, wishing you good luck with the race and good health.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks, Andy. Pleasure having you.
Yep. Bye.